I have sort of a particular way of directing and making movies. I like to operate, I'm involved in a lot of, I'm choosing lenses. Like I want to be a part of those discussions and have influence in those discussions. And I'm not really just the director that's going to sort of leave it up to the DP to figure it out.
Okay, I want to welcome Joshua Caldwell to What the F Stop and How I Shoot. And thanks for joining us, Joshua. And where are you coming from?
So I'm up in the Hudson Valley in New York State, and I've lived here now for 9 years, which is insane because I lived in LA for 10 years, kind of right after I graduated college. And it's weird to think that I'm almost at the same time frame as I
Wow.
was then. Like I mean, it's a sign of getting old and time passing, but it's kind of crazy to think I've already been here in New York for 9 years. I went to school at Fordham University in New York City. So, and my wife is from the area. So we met in college and did the whole LA thing. And then when it was, time when we felt like we could afford to not be in LA, we made that move and it was great because we did it pre-pandemic, so we kind of already were out of there and yeah, it's great. I mean, I just love being up here and around nature and not being sort of in that kind of concrete jungle, of the city. And I get down to New York City enough to enjoy it, but
That's
not feel
great.
like
Yeah.
I'm the imposition of it, so to speak.
Right. Well, and there's such a great film community up in the Hudson Valley. It's a beautiful area. I've shot there a million times over the years and been to Woodstock. Woodstock has a great film festival, lots of
Yep.
really incredible technicians and directors and writers. Uh, Bradley Greer is an amazing colorist I work with. He just opened a facility there. He's originally based in New Orleans. So there's
Yeah, Bradley
something
did
that,
Infamous.
oh, he did Infamous. Great. Oh,
He
I
did
love Bradley.
Infamous, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I love
Um,
Bradley. We're talking
yeah, yeah.
about using him on this next film too.
Oh, beautiful. I hope
So,
you
and
do.
and originally it was like, oh, we did Infamous in New Orleans, and I'm talking to him, and he's like, I'm actually in Kingston now, and I was like, that's amazing. Like, I don't have to fly down to New Orleans anymore, and so yeah, no, it's cool to find that out. I hadn't talked to him in a while and reconnected, and that's funny that you also worked with him.
Oh yeah, I've done about 7 or 8 films, features with Bradley. He color corrected my feature Stargazer that I directed, that I was lucky
Okay,
enough to get to direct. But before that, I did a number of films with Sean Shanghani. I first met with him on a film called White Rabbit that we shot in New Orleans with Tim McCann, and then we loved what he did. He brought so much new kind of vision to the film, like the way Tim and I had shot it was in one kind of mindset, and then
hmm,
Bradley started opening up our eyes to what he could bring to the process.
yeah,
And like he just is a genius with bringing just a new vision and a new way of looking. He knows those tools, the DaVinci Resolve and all the
yeah.
color correction software. So it's great when your collaborators can really just help you in ways that you didn't even realize you needed help, right?
Right. Yeah.
You
And
know,
also
so
not feel like, in the world of post, as we all know, like, especially on lower budget stuff, you end up getting into this thing of like, you just don't really have the time or money to get it done. And one of the things I love about Bradley is he's like, we'll get it done. Like his approach is like, let's do the best job that we can, and is not really going to, you get into, everybody wants to work with these big houses, but if you can't really afford to do it properly, you're sort of going like, all right, well, time's up,
yeah. No,
like,
they'll
and
really treat you like the help. Oh,
yeah.
you can enter on that side street entrance.
Right, right. And we'll
Don't
give you
come
a
in
few
this
hours to
revolving
play
door.
around. Yeah. So, oh,
Um,
that's great. We could do
yeah,
a whole
no,
podcast
Bradley's the
on Bradley,
best.
I'm sure.
We'll make sure he sees this video.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the collaborators are so important, and also let's speaking of collaborators, let's talk about Eve Cohen. So you've had her shoot, I think, 3 of your features now. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. 3 features.
Great. And what brings you back? What brings you hiring her back? Like for people starting out looking to like build a career, often if you're not directing or producing, you've got to kind of, build up with other directors or other producers or writers or other creatives. So what are you looking for as a director for those kind of collaborators? And what was it about Eve that brought her back to you on other projects?
Yeah. Eve, the thing that I'm looking for two things when I look for collaborators, especially with the DP. I've can work with other department heads, and I'm not as particular with them, but with the DPs, I'm very particular. Beyond, I worked with a really great DP named Paul Nichols for like basically the first half of my career. So he shot everything up until Layover, and then circumstances of shooting movies in LA. He's based in New York, but shooting movies in LA sort of had me needing to find an LA based person, which was Eve. And Paul actually shot the newest feature that I just did. It was not Eve. So, but with Eve or any collaborator, Paul, Eve, like what I'm looking for is twofold. One, I'm looking for, I don't like the idea that, especially going into a quick shoot or a low budget thing, that this is the first time I'm going to work with this DP. I had an experience as a producer where we were doing a project and the DP and director didn't know each other, and the DP just like kind of hijacked the project, and in a way that just like slowed everything down, wasn't giving us what we wanted, and I was just like, never want to be in that situation, ever. But two, I have sort of a particular way of directing and making movies. I like to operate. I'm involved in a lot of, I'm choosing lenses. Like I want to be a part of those discussions and have influence in those discussions. And I'm not really just the director that's going to sort of leave it up to the DP to figure it out. Some things, yes, but just having an ongoing collaborative relationship, is also is the other thing that's very important. So it's basically like I don't really want a project to be the first time we work together. Although sometimes that's going to happen, but if I can avoid it, it's better because you just have a shorthand. It's tough because on a lot of these lower budget things, you don't get a ton of prep time. You don't really have a year to get to know the person and do tests and talk about what you like and what you don't like. Often, like by the time you get to set, you've only really been talking for like a week or two, sometimes, and then you're hashing stuff out on set, and I am not interested in hashing stuff out on set. Like, it's like I want to try and solve that beforehand. I want to have an understanding of like how I like to shoot, how I like to frame, what I'm looking to do with the way we frame stuff and the way we light stuff, so that it's not like, wait, this is not what we discussed. So it's just, I find it's just easier to already have a shorthand with specifically the DP. Costumes, production design, like I find that I don't run into those issues, but I've just like been in a place where I'd rather build relationships and work with those people that I trust and trust me and know that like, we built up a very collaborative relationship.
Absolutely. The number one thing I think is always for everyone working on a film to keep that in mind, that like we're all working towards this shared goal. And
Right.
you mentioned earlier having DPs that, try to hijack, make it about them. Maybe they want to take half the day to light it. I worked with a lot of those people when I was coming up as either a PA or a lighting assistant. And I saw very quickly, even from a low position, like that dude's like killing the day. Not
Yeah.
only is he killing us as a crew, like I'd work with people where we set the same light 5 times. I'm like, how does this guy not know where to put the light? Like
Right.
he's got gray hair. Like what the heck?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel like, yeah, my number one goal as a DP on a project is, what does the director need and how can I help them? Like, do
Yeah.
they need coverage? Do they
Right.
need a specific look? Is it like a genre movie that has to look like something? Is
Right.
the lighting important? And honestly, the thing that I always find is coverage above all, like make it look like something, but don't kill the day. Hands down,
Right.
don't kill the day.
And that's the really important thing, I think, especially like working in, let's call them the sub $5 million budget range, right? Because like even if you have, I found even if you have $4 million, you're still only getting 20 days to shoot. So, in that world, we just, the DP has to understand how to run a crew, how to run a set, how to get things up and running quickly, right? Because like we just don't have time. We don't have time to perfect the lighting. And when I did my third movie, Negative, and I decided to just DP that myself. And I kind of wanted to use it as an experiment, but because I really believed that like at the time, everybody was sort of, red, 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 red. Like everybody was about the red and resolution and 8K and 6K and all that stuff. And I really believed, and I think you're seeing this now play out. I really believed and spoke a lot about at that time that the future of cinematography is not resolution. It's low light sensitivity. And that has now become the dominant trait in most of these cameras, and the dominant desire of DPs. When you talk about, that Bob Dylan film that shot at 12,800 ISO, you have all these cameras coming out with dual native ISOs, Aries getting the extended ISO, stuff. Like nobody's trying to push for 8K anymore. That's really like basically we've kind of reached the max at which we
Too
can.
much. It's like really
It's too much. You're never broadcasting in that. I don't think we're really going to get to 8K DVDs or Blu-rays or anything like that. I just don't see it happening. And so, to me though, the low light is really what actually can save your ass on set.
especially
And
in this low budget realm of a couple
yeah,
$1 million or less, right?
yeah.
You're
I
just
mean,
never having those giant lighting trucks and stuff.
you just don't need them anymore. And I
No.
think like that, but the getting that to be adopted by the crews, and by the DPs is also like an important part of it. So like when we were looking at doing, when I did negative, I wanted to shoot on a Canon, and I wanted to shoot I wanted to push the ISO, and I wanted to prove that you could shoot at 10,000 ISO, and higher, and still get an image that frankly audiences are not going to critique. And we ended up shooting with the Canon around that time, came out with the ME20, which was that sort of industrial camera that shot at like a million ISO or something like that. And I had a connection at Canon, and said, I've got this whole extended nighttime sequence with a shootout up in the mountains in the desert, and I don't have the budget to light it, but I also don't want to do the thing where it's like, oh, there's clearly like a giant, either a balloon overhead or like with soft light, or you've got a 10K half a mile down the road providing, just floodlight. I wanted to see how much I could get away with. And so like we ended up on that using like shooting at 25,000 ISO and 100,000 ISO. And yeah, it's like a little noisy. We ended up stripping some of that out. But the ability, it's a funny story, not really having been able to test this camera because we were in production when we were doing it. I was like, I don't know. Like I talked to DPs like, hey, I'm shooting this desert sequence. Like what kind of lights should I go up there with? And they recommended some, and we rented it. And I had a small crew, and we started kind of setting up to just like, where are we going to put these lights, and how are we going to sort of do this? And I remember like we got one of these, I don't remember the name of the light, but it was like almost one of those like, it was almost one of those like stage lights, it wasn't a par can. It was one that you could focus more. And we turned it on. I'm just like, this is like way too bright, even knowing we're bringing it down.
Right.
And I remember I was sitting there, we were like turning it off, and we had a little on a stand. I was looking at the monitor, and I saw my shadow, and I saw sort of the desert ground, and it was kind of this bluish hue, but I could make out the difference. And I looked around behind me on a stand was like a 20-watt, CTB work light. And I was like, we'll just use that. Like, that's perfect, And then I think other stuff we would like just have somebody with a little square LED light just out of camera frame, just sort of pointing it down at the ground for any wide shots. And it got done, we used basically a couple of 1x1 panel lights to shoot most of that sequence, turned about as low as you could get them. And, and it looked great. And so that kind of proved my point, which was like, the ability to push a camera's low light sensitivity to shoot at higher ISOs, that is going to be what really ends up changing the game in terms of cinematography, especially on low budget stuff. Because you could just go into places. When we shot the opening sequence of that movie in a Thai restaurant down the street from me, I walked in, I set the camera up at 800 ISO. It wasn't usable. At 3200 ISO, I didn't have to change any of the lights in the restaurant, And you could argue the image and the technical and like all that stuff, but that allowed me to shoot that sequence in like an hour or two versus like, okay, now we got to change every single light in this restaurant and switch it all out, and it's going to take forever. And so it's like, it's that kind of stuff that was really interesting to me to explore. and be able to then work with DPs and say, no, I know that we can get away with this. We don't need the light that you're saying we need, and we don't need to use the time that we're saying we need. Because I really believe firmly that at the end of the day, what audiences gravitate towards is the actors and the story.
Absolutely.
And they will forgive image. Now, that's not to discount the contribution that cinematographers make, but to your point, you have to know the production you're on. And you have to be able to say, when is it worth taking the time and when is it not worth taking the time? And coming back to Eve and sort of collaboration, you know, when she and I would talk through features, especially with Infamous, because I really wanted it to be this kind of gonzo, you know, I didn't want to feel like I wanted to be able to shoot in a lot of directions. I like to go into a set and not feel I can only shoot in a certain way because I never know. Like I'm often responding instinctually to what the actors are doing, and I'm trying to get the actors to be instinctual. So I'm often trying to say, how can we see as much of the world? But one of the great things that kind of came out of that when Eve and I would talk was really the discussion around when is a scene settled? Like when are we settling? And when are we not settling? And a great example of that is the scene where Ariel in Infamous, where Ariel first talks to Dean and they're by the fire. Like you're settled there, right?
Right. You've got those French overs, like you've got the
but
wide shot with the fire, the French over
Right.
look really great. She looks over, there's the girls watching them, so
Yeah.
she's feeling self-conscious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
no,
also
that's a
you're
nice
holding on their faces.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
you want them to look good.
Yeah. You're also
and-
the camera was very shaky before, but now it's settling. It's
Yeah.
like you said, so physically it's settling as well as like you're calming creating a calming moment.
Right. And so if there's a weird shadow on
Right.
either actor's face,
No, it's
you're
distracting.
seeing that. You're just settling there for 5 minutes. So you're basically like watching this shadow. So it makes sense to take time to like light that properly, right? Contrasted with the scene later in the convenience store when she gets into the shootout, you know, with the guy. Basically, Eve switched out the bulbs, the fluorescent bulbs in the ceiling to make them all consistent, and then said, "Have at it,"
Right.
because she knew that was going to be shaky and
Yeah.
and kinetic, and we weren't really going to be settling on any particular shot too much. Now, it also still looks great.
Yeah.
You know, but you can
No,
get away with
the
a lot
camera
more.
like takes over there from the lighting, right? It's about
Yeah.
her. She's dodging behind, trying to avoid getting shot. That
Right.
she gets shot.
But it's also
back, all that.
yeah, yeah. And it's also going. That's what the convenience store looks like. I'm very big on this is what it looks like to my eye when I go in, and I want to maintain that. Now, whatever you need to do to maintain that, I understand, but I don't want to beautify it. Right? Like I like ugly fluorescent lighting. I think I actually find it beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? But it depends on the movie you're making. Like I was listening to the Team Deacons podcast with Soderbergh, and he was talking about how, you know, just in certain movies, he's like, if you look at Black Bag, he's like, you know, that's kind of supposed to be like a sexy, beautiful, fun thriller. Ocean's 11, like you're going to take time to get that to look good. He's like, but then you contrast that with another movie, and you're like, no, it's like it's supposed to be ugly.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
ugly.
I've never forgotten. This just has stuck in my mind since I saw it. In that original Sam Raimi Spider-Man, you know, he's been bitten by the radioactive spider, and you know, Tobey Maguire goes to the doctor to find out what's wrong with him, and it's lit like a Caravaggio, chiaroscuro. You know,
Right.
I've never been in a doctor's office that was anything other than too bright,
Right,
Because
right.
they want to see. It's an analytical space. It's not
Yeah.
a nightclub.
Yeah.
And, you know, that movie looks great and everything. I'm not trying to rag on Spider-Man, but I just find I agree with you where like things should look like they should look.
Right.
And a convenience store, like who's going to sell anything if you're in this dark, seedy feeling environment,
Yeah.
right? Just like
Which
you
is-
don't go into a nightclub and it's overly lit unless they're
Right,
taking
right.
everyone out.
Right. Which is, again, and by the way, there's plenty of movies where they lean into that really intentional lighting for everything, and it works. It's just about the movie you're making and the time that you have to make it in, and accepting, you know, what's going to come with that. And so, so you know, I think that's like, you know, with whereas like kind of with Mending the Line, you know, Infamous was meant to be very kinetic. Like our approach on that, you know, discussions with Eve was twofold. One, in terms of the color, I wanted to mimic an Instagram filter. You
Right.
know, that
Yeah,
kind of like
everything pops. Everything's
everything
kind of
poppy,
grabbing for attention.
high saturation,
Yeah.
you know, good contrast. Like, you know, there was like a filter on Instagram, the X Pro filter, where suddenly, you know, blacks get black, and like to me that looked really good. And we wanted to emulate that, right? But then the other thing was in terms of the camera work, we wanted to emulate kind of like, you know, live streamed or YouTube style sort of vlog videos, right?
Right.
This
Right.
feeling of there's a person there with a camera capturing this.
Right. Right.
And also like in terms of a lot of the oneers, it was like, you know, when you live stream something, you're not getting multiple angles. So you
Right.
get that
Right.
kind of one. So those were sort of the two approaches that we wanted to take in terms of the visuals.
Did you do any of that two camera, or was it single camera shoot throughout on Infamous?
Infamous was, I think it was just one camera.
One camera?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think we ever did. Yeah, we never had a second camera on it.
Okay.
You know, whereas like Mending the Line was a very a different but similar, but different. Like Mending the Line was, you know, meant to be a little bit more classical, you
Yeah.
know, in
Yeah.
terms of its approach. It was not going to be this frenetic thing.
But
You
you
know,
still had a nice handheld quality to it.
yeah,
Like I saw a lot of similarities. So for those listening, you know, Mending the Line's about a Marine who's been traumatized his last day in Afghanistan, and they've been attacked, and he's now in a sort of VA trauma ward and trying to get better. And as opposed to, you know, the kind of, so it's got much more of a like you say, a classical storyline. It's about redemption. It's about finding, you know, that core of yourself again when you think you've lost what's, you know, the only thing that's important to you.
right. Yeah,
So,
and
no,
so
go
with
ahead.
that approach, our idea was okay, because I was also like, look, we're going to shoot handheld, you know, but it was sort of where do we want to shoot handheld, and sort of looking at okay, the handheld comes into play when Coulter is sort of unstable, right? When he's not comfortable, when he's not feeling good, when he's not, you know. So we tried to go by that rule, and then otherwise, you know, we sort of leaned into more, you know, shooting on dollies a lot more, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah,
Prior to that, I
yeah,
hadn't done a lot of it and kind of like negate, like didn't want to do it because it felt like it was going to take too much time. But honestly, on Mending the Line, the dolly saved our butt a number of times
I
by
love
with
working
those.
with dollies, especially these
Yeah,
days when, like, the Dana dolly has really taken over for especially low budget movies,
yeah.
and it's really
There's
nice
nothing
to
like a
just have
Fisher
that big
11 though.
heavy
I'll say
thing.
that.
Oh, it's great because it also, just like shooting on film encourages intentionality, so does using a dolly. You just really
Right.
say, this is going to be our frame. We're going to move from here to there, maybe with some options. Maybe I'll throw a zoom on it so I can get wider
Yeah.
and tighter. But I think it really helps in that intentional shooting kind of style.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, I'm always interested, you know, in any project going, how are the visuals supporting the story, right? Which everybody does. But I am a very subjective filmmaker.
Hmm.
You know, even with Mending the Line, which probably required more of an objective lens, I couldn't do it. It's just not my nature to shoot something sort of objectively.
Hmm.
Um, and I like the subjectivity. I like to think about how is this camera framing or how is the way the camera's moving influencing the audience's experience of what we're telling them, because I think that's the power of it. Again, you know, if you're being told I'm fine by the character, but the camera's not fine, right? You're going to feel that. You may not be all wholly aware of it, but you are going to feel, so you are, it's going to connect with you on a subtextual level. And that's what that's what I'm always interested in doing.
And you're good with that with both of those films, with Infamous and Mending the Line, where you're getting close, and so the audience sees the lie, right?
Yeah.
And that's what
Right.
we love. We love as viewers or as readers, if you're reading a book, that unreliable narrator always is interesting. It's
Yeah.
always something that, you know, because everybody's hiding things, right?
Right.
Everybody, you know, your family, your friends, whoever it is, you know. So I feel like that's a very relatable thing. Is like, oh, so and so's told me this, but really,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And that's the
yeah,
part I just find really interesting about filmmaking, you know, is the
absolutely,
ability to use the visuals to support or contradict or juxtapose the text
yeah,
of the film that you're making. And I think that's the power of it, you know. So to me, the subjective approach. It's often what I look for in scripts.
Yes.
Is the ability to be subjective with it, but also then, going where and how do I lean into this, and,
Well, I think a great example of that from Mending the Line is where you get into that sequence where they're trout fishing, and the camera literally stops. It goes into super telephoto mode, and everybody's getting fish, and
Right.
they're like the sequence. It's got music, and it's the first moment in the movie where you actually feel a sense of relief after all this
Right.
tension building up, and everybody's suffering their own personal trauma in various degrees, all the characters. So, it's like you really feel that as a viewer. And again, we hope that people aren't watching it like I am, where I'm like, oh, here, ding, ding, ding.
Right. Right.
As a filmmaker, I'm like, oh, he's doing this,
Yeah.
and again, we want to hide the brushstrokes. We want people to just feel it, not
Right.
analyze it.
Right. And it's funny on that you mentioned that on Mending the Line, like we kind of, I'm always interested, especially with low budget stuff, on like what are the rules, right? Because like as a director and even as a DP, you're just constantly bombarded with the need to make decisions.
Yes.
And how do you have to make as few decisions as possible, right? So like when we did, I was always really intrigued by the hearing about Aronofsky's approach to Mother. And if you watch Mother, regardless of what you think of the film, there's only 3 shots in that whole movie. There's in front of Jennifer Lawrence, there's behind Jennifer Lawrence, and then there's a POV shot of what she's
Right.
seeing.
Right.
And characters come in and out of her orbit, but we don't move with those characters. So when did that movie come out? I'm trying to remember if this
About
happened
10 years
before or
ago,
after.
maybe
Yeah.
mid 20.
I'm trying to remember it before and after. It was Layover. But when we did Layover, we did a similar thing, which was basically like the camera was grounded to Natalie's character Simone's experience. So it was interesting because I had an argument with the DP about it. So my whole idea was like the camera is attached to Simone. So if a character goes away from her, we're not going to move with them. We're either going to keep them wide, or what I said was we are going to zoom in. And the DP said, but if you zoom in, it's going to compress the space. I'm like, there's a version where that happens, but it's not, because the audiences can tell when something has been zoomed in and when the camera's physically closer.
Absolutely.
And the act of being zoomed in actually is going to increase the distance that you feel from Simone to that other person. And after we saw the movie, he goes, yeah, you were right. But it
So
was
rarely we hear that.
yeah, but it was that kind of thing, which was like, I anchored the camera to her, and everything was either in front of her or behind her. I guess we did some POVs, but if a character left, what we did was we zoomed in on them, to reach that. So just that kind of rules, right? Like are interesting, because then you don't have to worry about like, what's the lens size here? Are we doing coverage? And you're like, well, no, like this is how we're shooting this scene. That's how we're going to do it. So when you think about Mending a Line, like one of the rules we talked about was, because we are subjectively, mostly through Coulter's experience, he is in, and this was the hardest thing to do, he's in beautiful Montana and does not see it. So the first half of that movie, basically up until we get this beautiful sweeping crane shot when they arrive at the river for the first time, we are very tight and claustrophobic on Coulter, with a couple of small exceptions. Namely, the first time we introduce Brian, we get a nice wide shot of the river.
Yeah, that's beautiful with him in the river there.
Because he's
falls
not
over.
experiencing, he sees Montana for what it is. But anytime you're with Coulter, and for the most part, I wanted to create a claustrophobic feeling for the audience of like, why are they're always tight. They're not seeing the landscapes. They're not seeing whatever. You don't see the sky, and it was because we wanted to hit that moment. And then after that, everything kind of opens up. And now we're into much wider shots. We're into much more beautiful shots, the fishing shots, everything kind of, you see the sky, you see the mountains, because now he's able to see the beauty that's around him. And, so that was a very hard rule to follow, because of course you're in this like really beautiful landscapes and you want to shoot it, but you kind of have to do what's best for the film.
But it
And
also feels like, as a viewer, I felt like watching him like arrive. He's in the van, and you see out the window of the van. So it's sort of a layer and a layer and a layer. You see him,
right.
you see the window, the frame within the frame, as film professors love to say, and then
Yeah.
the mountains are in the distance. And what I liked about that, honestly, was that, I don't need to see some shot of a mountain to be impressed with the movie. Like, it felt like what it feels like when you arrive there. You're like, oh, I thought I'd be near the mountains. But of course, nobody's building towns on a mountain unless
Right.
you're in Switzerland,
Yeah.
right? Unless there's no flatland. So, like, it actually just felt more like I was arriving like a passenger in the van with him. So again, that subjective approach to shooting movies, I think I agree with you. It's really important to help the audience. You're kind of the guide of the audience, take him through
Yeah.
the story. And, if I feel like I love the Lord of the Rings movies, but there's something really annoying to me about those movies. And again, it's total fantasy. But instead of the party walking towards those mountains, like I come from a hiking family, so I know what it's like to walk towards a mountain and you're
Right.
like, okay, we'll get there in an hour or in another hour or in another hour. Like there's a deceptive amount of distance when
Right.
you're on the ground.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like when you're making a realistic movie, not, and back to the Lord of the Rings, they're always helicoptering up to mountains. So you can
Yeah.
tell, whoever made that film isn't really a mountain climber,
Right. Right. And you can forgive it because it's an epic.
It's an
you know, and
epic, yeah,
you
yeah.
want to see it.
It's a
But
different
yeah,
type
I mean
of-
that's a great example. Is that shot in the van? I was like, I want Coulter's first experience and the audience's first experience with Coulter to not be like, oh, this great drone shot of a van and you see the mountains and all that stuff. It's like you barely see it. It's sort of blown out. Everything's cut off by the frame of the window. Like he is not seeing Montana for what it is. And so, again, that kind of like approach was how it sort of helped define um, the visual language of that film for us.
So as a director, you wrote Infamous, but you did not write Mending the Line. How do you approach, as you're breaking down a script, if it's someone else's, like, is it easier to direct someone else's script just because like it hasn't been in your head as long? Can you approach it in a different way? Or how do you see that kind of difference between those two kinds of directing approaches?
I think it's easier to kill babies on a script that's not yours. I write on everything I do. I just don't always have credit. And often I'll tell the writers that I'm like, look, I'm going to rewrite this. I'm not going to take credit for it, but I am going to rewrite it because in a lot of cases, a lot of it is being done around production, right? Like, oh, we have to make adjustments for production, or we're in production, and I just don't have time to. I've just got to get it down. So I end up doing a lot of rewriting. I did a lot of rewriting on Mending the Line, but really like not in a way that was. A lot of the writing I do is not creating substantial changes to the original draft. Like I think if we did go through a WG arbitration, I would not be awarded writing credit, right? Because I don't think I made that. A lot of it is geared around some structure issues and also just gearing it towards a producible. Now we need to move into blueprint territory as
Right.
opposed to
It's going out of fantasy, the fantasy of the script is
Right.
becoming the reality of whatever location or the actor you got.
Right.
You know.
And I want that reflected. I want the scout and the information we learn as we make the film to be reflected in the script because otherwise it's super confusing. But I have never been somebody that said I have to direct the things I write. I don't write fast enough, nor am I, frankly, like a good enough solo writer to only lean on that. I recognize what my strengths are, and Infamous was a movie that just sort of came out of a desire I had the idea, as unoriginal as it might be, but I had the idea and I said, I think this would be a cool thing to write. And I sort of just was, sort of drawn to write it. I wrote Layover, same reason. Like a lot of times when I'm really feeling sort of an approach and I know I can do it, then I might write something. But I really feel like my strength as a director and as a writer and a producer, frankly, is working with existing material. I really love the sort of rewriting process, once you get into production. I wrote a whole post about that, about how, on Substack, about how like you have to kind of like start to reframe the story in your head. And that is when, as a writer, I really feel myself come alive and really feel like, oh, this is a skill that I know I have. Whereas if I'm trying to write a script and I'm on a blank page, I'm like, why am I trying? Like, this is the worst experience, the most miserable experience that I can think of. So I've recognized over time where my value is, as a writer. But it doesn't really end up making that much of a difference to me. I mean, I can be, it is a little easier to not be married to what's on the page when you weren't the one to write it.
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
But the skill set is to be able to do that with the stuff that you write, and I mean, even on Infamous, like we did a lot of rewriting, like, on set and as we shot, and I really kind of like, I don't, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think that I'm a good enough writer to not allow myself to be rewritten by
Right.
myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
I
does.
don't, I
Oh,
don't
go
think I'm a good enough writer to think that once I have that draft done, we're done. Even without making changes, I say to the talent, I'm like, look, I view the script as a blueprint. It's a starting point. I'm not a writer who's like, you have to say this. I might need to say, we need to get this point across. If you have a better idea on how to do it, fine. But even when we're shooting, I'm not a slave to what's on the page unless there's a really specific reason for it. Um,
Yeah.
and
So for Infamous, you had Bella Thorne as your lead there. She's, just pretty amazing actor, I think. What was the process of, did you work with her in terms of letting her go off script, or did she like want to drive some of the scenes, or what was your process working with Bella on that?
I had a great time working with Bella. Like, I know she's got a reputation, which I think is wrong, unfortunately, but like, for what it's worth, I thought she was great. She was super professional. I loved working with her and I would do it again. She was a great collaborator. And, she was somebody who came on the project kind of early on before we really even had the financing in place. She was a big part of helping us, allowing us to get that financing at the end of the day. But what was really awesome about working with Bella was I kind of had like almost a year of development with her, prior to shooting the movie. And in addition to tweaking stuff and what do you think and what do you like about this and that kind of stuff, it was also just allowed us to really know who this character was, before we got into production. We had a very clear vision and a shared vision of who Ariel was. And so that way, once we got onto set, which is the way I like to do it, there's not a lot of like talk about it. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, just do it again, try
You
it
want
again,
to you want to
like play.
establish all that and then get to give yourself those options on set.
Yeah. And I don't think we really deviated that much from the script. I mean, she brought her own language to it, which at that point I really support. Like if an actor is embodying the character, then, have at it. I really, the way that I talk to actors and the way that I discuss the development of a role with them is I say, look, I don't think that we're on train tracks with this character. You do not need to adhere to anything. But what we need to do is have a shared vision of who this was. And the way I describe it is we're building a corral, a circular corral. And the fence of this corral is sort of the characterization. They're this old, male, female, like, the stuff that sort of makes up the person, the sort that defines the person, the biography, where they came from, that kind of thing. And we kind of agree to that. And then once we're on set, within that characterization, you can go where you want to go. Like I'm not fine tuning. We're not, and maybe we fine tune it, but I'm not dictating where you need to go. So if out of nowhere, if we've done our job and the easiest way to describe it for people that don't really know is if out of nowhere you're suddenly extremely emotional within this scene, well, that's born out of the experience that you have right now existing as this character and playing it. So it's not really wrong. Maybe it's not really what we want to do. We decided to do one without that. But, I like to allow them the freedom within the character to play the role and just, allow things to come up and allow things to to appear that maybe that I never could have directed, you know? And so a great example is obviously also the big thing is you never really know until that first day if what the actor is going to do, and it's always a bit of an unknown, especially because you don't really get rehearsal time, you know, nor do I really want the rehearsal time. I like the surprise of it, but if you've done your job, it all works out. But I remember we were shooting the scene, it was day one, first scene of the movie, and we were shooting the scene where they've just gotten through the police blockade, and they get Dean out of the trunk, and Amber Riley's there, and they leave her in the dust, right? And I remember at some point we're shooting, I think we're shooting the wide shot, you know, the master, and Bella does this little like twirl at some point. And I saw that and I was like, we're going to be good. Like, you know, didn't tell her to do it, never talked about like that aspect of it. And it just like showed up. And I'm like, all right, she's locked in. Like she knows who this character is. She knows the tone of this movie. And we're going to be great, you know, and we were like, and at that point, if you've done your job, like I'm often just telling the actors, like for the most part, I just say like, let's do it again. Let's try it again. And then we'll fine tune little bits here and there, you know?
Yeah, so you're more in quality control mode rather than creation, like creating from scratch mode. I think that's
Yeah.
very
Which I
helpful.
think most people do. I don't think anybody's really creating from scratch when you're on set.
Right.
Maybe if you have 100 days, you can do a little bit of that, but like, you know,
Well,
so
there's a lot of ways to write though, right? You know, you've got the
yeah,
script, you've got the camera, you've got the all the different audio and but the actors they bring their own version of writing in terms of how they play the role. I love
yeah.
the surprises.
That's to me the most exciting part. The most exciting part is when the actors are on set and suddenly they're performing and they're bringing the character to life, and you're seeing the little nuances of the performance. You're seeing the decisions that they make. You're seeing the choices. Like that to me is like that's the best part because it's not something. It's taking it beyond theory and beyond the need for me to try and figure it out and allowing it to just exist, you
Yeah.
know. And then in a lot of ways, you know, I feel like it's my job to capture that, you know, as best we can, as opposed to staging it, so to
Right,
speak.
right. And also with the location work you do, a lot of the films I've seen you direct here, you're on location, you're in the mountains or a sort of fake Afghanistan, you know,
Yeah,
but if you feel those two different areas very clearly in the film, same with Infamous, it's a road trip movie, they're going through the South. And have you done much in terms of like stage work on any of these movies, or have they all been locations that you're then lighting and manipulating?
all locations. I have yet to be in a position to shoot on a stage. Well, for a feature, I've done stage work back in my early days when I worked for Anthony Zeiker, and we were doing some web series, and we got to shoot on some stages, you know, like kind of thing, because we were
Mhm.
adjacent to the CSI New York stage, so we could
Okay.
take advantage of it. But which was great and worked. There's something really nice about being on the stage, but you know, I do love location work. You know, I remember seeing a quote from, you know, Inaratu about working on location. He's like, you know, the beauty of like shooting on location is like, you know, in real life, you don't get to move the wall,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. You have
and
to
you're
make
sort of
it work.
forced into a way of seeing the world as it actually is, as opposed to how you want it to be. And there's something kind of interesting about that, you know. And of course, that was about I think his movie Beautiful, you know, versus some of the other movies where I'm sure he's had a lot more control. But um, no, I like location work. I like the way I think as a filmmaker, like I'm much more comfortable in a world of sort of using what's there as opposed to building it from scratch. I guess that also comes into the whole thing with the writing, right? Like I'm much better at adapting and or working with existing material than I am coming up with it on the page. Um, but I've just never had the luxury really of being able to afford stage days. You know, now we've done stuff within the films. Like we had, you know, one of the nice things on Mending the Line was the location that was the hospital and the doctor's office and the VA clinic. That was basically it was an abandoned former hospital and adult senior home that was in the middle of Bozeman, which was slated for demolition a couple months after we wrapped. And so we actually ended up using that as like, for a bunch of different stages for a bunch of different sets that we could. That was the first time really where I was like, we can paint all these walls and we can tear something down. And, I remember so in the fly shop stuff in the back room, the fly shop's back room was like a closet. There wasn't really one. And I was like, we kind of need one. So they ended up building that whole thing on a, part of the, it was like the lunchroom, of this senior center. And we were able to build out a back room. And I was like, this was cool. Like, this was great.
Oh, it's great
But
when you have that kind of control on location. So you could probably drill through walls, get some
yeah,
cables to go through if you needed to, things like
yeah,
that.
yeah. Paint, like, tear some stuff down. There's a whole sequence in the movie which never made it into the final film where one of the floors in the hospital was like, it was this kind of like completely stripped down, and it was like a whole storage facility for like all the wheelchairs and stuff they were getting rid of. And like we ended up turning that into like this kind of meth den that was part of this whole storyline that we ended up cutting out of the film. And so that was fun to kind of do builds and sort of turn it into stuff. But it's just rare that I really get to do that. And I'm often, I just like location work because I like it's also feeds into what I like about with actors, was there's stuff that you couldn't have really thought of or come up with on your own if you were telling somebody to build it versus what you're discovering in location and in your scouts that, bring so much to it.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got one of I think my favorite things about filmmaking is going places I've never been to shoot. And so you get that double bonus of you're in a place you haven't been before. It's all new and exciting. And then you're also able to kind of take it as it is. And maybe you're frustrated at first, but then ultimately, you're wanting to take things that weren't the way you maybe imagined them and
Right.
use them to their best ability, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like the bank in Infamous was like, that whole mural, which I thought was like super cool. That was like just in the bank, that we found. And
Yeah.
sometimes you go, oh, I never would have thought of having a mural there until I wouldn't have thought to say, let's put a mural up, and things like that. Obviously, with bigger budgets, you could start to do that. But
Yeah, it's one thing if you've got months and months of design work and you can approve designs, or if you're creating a world like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or something.
yeah,
But like any kind of real world movies, I feel like I feel personally the world's more interesting than I am in a sense.
right.
You just like, I'm only one perspective, but then you go to a set and 20 people have lived there or, done things in this space if it's public that, like you
Yeah,
said, you've got that mural or you've got, a place. And you can also, I like those moments of fakery where you have one sort of base location and just due to like a low shoot day count, you might have to say, we can't go company move all over. So like you said,
right.
the fly shop was in the VA hospital. And like, I would never know that. It looked like, you had a good production designer. So I just
Yeah,
believed that they walked into the back room of that fly shop.
right. And that's the thing to always remember is like, audiences don't go into movies looking for those flaws in terms of like the technical flaws, so like there's so much that allows you to get away with, um versus like, I mean, story flaws they'll notice before they notice the technical flaws. They're not tracking like, wait, does that really make sense with where they came from and how they, what I mean, you're just
The,
there.
the other room was white and this is off white. I don't
Right.
buy it.
And the other thing too is like, as a filmmaker, like you spent so much time thinking about it, and then you get into the edit and you're looking at it, like you realize like most people, one, they're turning it on blind. They're kind of going in blind. They don't really know what's coming up. They don't know what to expect. So a lot of stuff passes over their head. And the other thing is not really going, wait, let me rewind that and rewatch that little thing to see like, oh, is his hair different in that scene versus this scene? Because I think like when you go back to like what Walter Murch talks about, which is the idea of like basically, cutting for continuity is the last thing that you cut for. And because it's the last thing people will notice if you do a good job with the emotion and with the performance and with all that stuff. And it's hard to accept that because when you're editing it, you're like, this is so blatant, like I can't not see this. Um, and you just realize that really what I always come back to is like, for the most part, and this extends to when you're thinking about lighting and whether you're taking extra time to light a specific thing or not, or when you're thinking about, continuity, when you're thinking about the edit, when you're like all focused on these very minute details, at the end of the day, 99% of your audience is going to basically come away from your movie saying, I liked it or I didn't like it.
Yep.
And everything else that you do is protecting them not seeing a huge flaw, or it's for the reviewers and the film historians that you think are going to be paying attention to this movie in 5 years. And I say that from experience because I was a filmmaker who thought, oh, this is an important movie. Someday people are going to study this thing, right? I mean, look, I will admit to it, and I know other people have thought that way too. They don't. Nobody cares. Like we are not. It's so hard now to get a movie just made that nobody's really, especially in this under five world. This stuff's just being pumped out. Like it's not like the '80s and '90s were like there were fewer movies being made, so everybody was paying attention to all of them. Because they were hard. They were hard to make. So like if you got it made and you were shooting on 35, it was like a thing worth sort of like putting some attention on. Nowadays, it's not, and so that gives you, especially in low budget world, that gives you a lot of forgiveness, to what you need to accomplish and what you're trying to get done, because I think at the end of the day, you just try and make something good, and
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and everything else, like reviewers don't really matter anymore, and you know, and so I think that's the sort of like thing a filmmaker should keep in mind is listen, there's a place for like, you know, producing every little single element of your film, and I applaud you if you want to go do it. I also know that 99% of your audience is never going to see it. And what you don't want to do is produce it at the expense of that end goal, you know,
Yeah.
which
No,
is just having people like your film.
you don't want to yeah, just nothing should be too precious, and you just have to keep that in mind of if you're going to make a movie, you're going to make a lot of mistakes or things will not be as you thought they would be. And just the beauty of this time we're in now, like you just said, is you can iterate. You can just try and try again. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just find like, so often through most of film history, how many people have said, oh, it took me 10, 15 years to get that script into a film, right? Because
Right.
you'd have to
Yeah.
have meeting after meeting or get approvals, get millions of dollars together. So,
Yeah. It's a lot to put on a film, even a short. When I hear people talking about, oh, I'm spending a year trying to put this short, I'm just like, good God, man, just go shoot it. Like,
yeah,
why,
yeah, don't
like
overthink it.
yeah, even with a feature, I mean, it's like not worth that. Like, I'll give you a great example of what I was just talking about, which was from Infamous. Is so there's the scene in the movie where she comes home. Her friends have just kind of given her crap for like, dating Dean, and she comes back and she comes into her house and she finds that like her money's missing, right? And then we go into this long,
I love that shot that follows through the whole room.
yeah, that big
It's a
single
beautiful
shot that
shot.
takes her to the other room, and then we're panning back and forth. I was like, I love that. It's one of my favorite shots of the movie. But what you don't see is in the original cut of that shot was what happens was she comes in, she finds the money, and then she finds a cigarette butt. And the idea was we established the cigarette butt as belonging to her mom's boyfriend. And she comes in and she basically like, holds it up. She's like, what is this? And that kind of thing. So I don't want to call it an argument. I got into a very big discussion with Sean, who was the producer on Infamous. And he was like, you got to cut the cigarette. And I never really fully understand why we had to cut the cigarette, but I was, of course, this young filmmaker who thought I knew better. And I was going like, oh, the sanctity of that oneer, we're going to ruin the sanctity of the oneer. Like, once you cut out of the oneer, the audience is going to go, why didn't they stay in the oneer? Right? And I'll admit to it now, it's a lot of bullshit from my perspective. And Sean was just saying, I forget the reasons why, but whatever the reason was, he was the producer and I did not have final cut. And I was like, okay, like I kind of like sat down and I said, well, it's never going to fucking work. But I'll try it. Because the other problem was later in the bedroom scene, she holds up the cigarette. I'm like, how do you get rid of the cigarette in there? And I sat down, you know, grumbling about it, and I was wrong. And I'm admitting that I was wrong. And I sat down. I don't know if I was wrong about the cigarette needing to stay in or not, but I was wrong in that it couldn't work to take it out. And I sat down and I made the edit. And what happens is she comes in, she finds the money, and then it jumps to her sort of, we cut out, we do a jump cut. But then once she's up there, the oneer is the oneer. And we managed to, because I'm panning back and forth and sort of whipping at times, I found the edit where I could cut out the cigarette.
And it really energizes
Nobody
that
notices.
moment. No one notices, and it energizes that moment. And again, that, like you, that was one of my favorite shots in the movie, just because of the energy following her through the room. She jumps into her parents' or her mom's room, and they're in the middle of coitus, and like she's screaming at them. And the thing is, as an audience member, I know damn well her mom's boyfriend stole her money, right?
Right. Yeah, you don't. And I think that was Sean's point. We don't need to hammer it over the audience's head with this clue.
Yeah.
And I was going, I was like, I don't necessarily disagree, but I'm like, if we cut the oneer, we're going to ruin the. So it was just very young. I mellowed out, and Sean, I apologize. You were right. But it was one of those things where at the time, you think that it's important and the audience is paying attention to it. And what you realize when it comes out is like, no, like it doesn't matter whether the cigarette was in there or not. Most people didn't like, a lot of reviewers hated the movie. Audiences did, sort of liked it, but other people, like, it was very divisive, which was it intending to be. But at the end of the day, nobody's going like, it would have been great if they hadn't jumped cut in the middle of that one. You know what I mean? So like,
we get wrapped up in these things because we've been overthinking it. And again, I agree. I've been there myself. I've gotten over that idea that, like, when I come up with some great shot and the director edits it a different way later, it's a betrayal. Like, that was my early sort of young DP mentality of like, we did this great shot that we planned out and you messed it up or whatever. And the excuse was always, and it's not an excuse obviously, but they would always say the performance was better in the shot I cut to. And now that I've directed a movie, a feature, and edited it as well as shooting it, I'm like, oh yeah, of course, duh. Like, no shot is better than a performance. No shot in any movie other than maybe Lawrence of Arabia. And those performances are too good, so it doesn't matter.
Right. I always go back to a quote from Soderbergh, that he said on the commentary for Traffic. I'm sorry, are you hearing any of this? My kids are playing. Okay. No. My kids are playing some video games in the room next door. He had a great quote, which was, he said, am I willing to forgive some kind of imperfection for truth, right? Or for an honest moment. And I think that I always come back to that, I always come back to, like, if the performance is honest, if the performance is truthful, if the performance is what it is, that I'm willing to forgive the imperfection, slightly out of focus, a bump, not the perfect framing, because the performance is what's going to connect to the audience, right?
100%.
Not the shot. The shot's for the cinephiles, maybe, if they're even paying attention to your film. But audiences, which is what drives sales and all that kind of stuff, and success is they are paying attention to the performance. And that was a big thing I learned from Layover. Layover was a very grungy, kind of dirty looking film. It was a lot of handheld. We were shooting on a 5D, at a f4 with like a stabilized lens, and basically right out of the box, I didn't even have like a shoulder rig or anything for it. It was like completely a completely naked camera. And but what audiences keep coming back to in that film is the story and the performance. Like, they connect to it. And that sort of, allowed me to say, we don't need to be perfect in the lighting. We don't need to be perfect in all this other stuff, because the audience we need to be perfect in the performance. And that's what with all my DPs, everybody I work with, I say, that is the focus. You are here in support of that. Right. Yeah. And it doesn't do me any good if we spend 75% of the time lighting to give me only 25% of the time shooting.
No, absolutely.
Because what I need is to make sure we get it, and get that performance. The lighting is secondary. Now, you need to have the image, right? But that was always something that was always very important to me, which is like we're prioritizing the performance. And that's often, what's weird is often you're in a place where you go, we are not prioritizing the thing that we're actually all here for, which is actors performing in front of the camera. We're prioritizing everything else. And so, and the other thing for DPs, the other thing that's really important is to recognize that it is rarely about the shot, and it's more about the sequence of shots. And
Absolutely.
often it's like, how long are we really spending on this shot? How long is as this actor in this darkness? Because why are we spending time trying to light it if they're just walking through it? That's when I talk about settled versus unsettled. And I think so that's often something I've seen too, which is like often there's a lot of focus on making the shot look perfect when, like you said, it may not even be in the film, you know?
Absolutely. And these days too, we're competing against all sorts of nonsense that people in the past weren't, in terms of someone's watching a TikTok, someone ranting into their phone or whatever. Nobody's like, oh, wow, that window's a little blown out or this or that. I wish they had
Right.
gotten a little more fill light, you
Yeah.
know. So the audience has really lost its need for perfection photographically,
Yeah.
in terms of connection. Like people
Right.
are rabid fans of TikTokers or YouTubers or any number of online social media, Instagram people. Bella Thorne has, I think, 23 million people following her on Instagram. So these are not, as obsessed as we are as filmmakers about making perfect images or getting the right look, whatever that might mean. Yeah, we just have to keep that in mind of it's going to look better than someone's TikTok video that's probably going to be seen way more than your movie.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So thinking about, like, you've been giving us a couple really good insights. You've been making movies for a couple decades now. You've made all sorts of shorts and features. Like, is there anything like overarching that you feel like you could go back and tell that younger self? What's been the biggest kind of revelations you've had from all this experience?
I mean, I think it's just, you, I think the biggest thing, and this is something that I wouldn't change because it's not like I was, you know, a jerk or anything like that. But I would say that probably the most important thing that you can show as a filmmaker is not the film. It's who you are and how you work and how you relate to other people. I think that we've seen, through Me Too and, just this reluctance for people to want to work with, for lack of a better term, assholes. I'm not going to say that you can earn your status as an asshole director. Some people have, but I think you're going to go a lot farther by being a guy who is willing to work with people, and I wasn't terrible, but I did learn that lesson, with like producers and stuff like that, of just saying like, how do I be a team player? And how do I support what they want? Which they look, at the end of the day, they want to make their money back. They want to have this film be a success. And sometimes they have a better insight to what's needed for that than I do. And my big thing is always like, okay, let me frame that, note through my own process, like as opposed to handing it off to somebody else. But I think like just being, I think for young filmmakers, being somebody who's like, while not just being a yes man or yes woman, just being somebody that people want to work with, like a nice person, somebody that people want to keep coming back to. Because I think that's kind of something that's sort of started to show up for me. I mean, certainly with collaborators, like I have people that, I've worked with over and over and over again, trying to get to that place with producers, and showing like, hey, like I want to be a guy that you can rely on. I want to be a director. I said this to the producer on my newest film. I said, listen, like I am a producer-minded director. Like you can come to set because you want to come to set, but you don't need to be on set to babysit me. You don't need to worry about me going over budget, behind schedule, like I will figure out if I get behind, I'll figure out a way to make it up. Like I'm not somebody that's going to spend, half a day on a single shot that's going to play for 10 seconds on screen. Like, and true to form, like I delivered, and I want to be that guy where somebody goes, you know what? Josh is like an executor. He's a craftsman. He's going to get the film done for the money that we have. He's not going to treat people poorly. He's not going to be a jerk on set, and he's a guy that people want to keep coming back to work with. I really pride myself on being a director that like actors want to work with, and love the experience of making a film with, because that's currency, in this industry. And so, and that gets spread around, and I've seen that happen, people reaching out to Bella saying, hey, like I saw you work with Josh. What do you think? And she's like, it was a great experience. I would do it again, and hearing that like is, gives me a lot of pride, that I've maintained my character and been somebody that, that people like and are willing to spend time with on a project. Doesn't mean we're not working hard. Doesn't mean I may not be stern or firm in what I'm asking for or what I need, but it's never a personal thing. And I'm never going to cross a line or make anybody really, hopefully not make anybody, intentionally feel uncomfortable or unsafe or anything like that. So, I like to be a guy that people can rely on. And
that's like the gold standard, right?
Yeah.
And
it's not hard.
No, it's not.
It's not hard. I say this as if it's like, a goal I work on every day. It's not. I mean, I'm naturally kind of that way, but it's just nice to be, I just take a lot more pride in that than being a jerk who nobody really are afraid of or doesn't really want to work with.
Well, when you have the pressure of being on set, knowing the money's flying out the door by the second, that kind of pressure, I've seen it turn normally nice people into raving lunatics.
Yeah.
At least temporarily.
Right.
So you have to be somewhat forgiving sometimes, like at least like, I've worked with, that's happened so many times. I started in the mid 90s and, definitely the tenor of film sets has gotten nicer over the years. I think it's for the best, honestly. Yeah. But I've always tried to, do the same thing as like, I want to be there to support whoever I'm working for. And it's both to create a nice environment, but it's also self-preservation. I only get work two ways, and that's recommendations or rehires. Right. I mean, there's no other way. I've worked freelance for 30 years now, and it's absolutely imperative that people like working with me, in addition to me being good at my job. So,
right.
No one's, if you get to that point, how many people really out there are so powerful that they can truly be, an oppressive, evil human being? Like, and
it
some of
catches
them
up to you.
In jail.
Might work for a while, but it's not going to last very long. And I think that, for me, look, filmmaking is hard enough and everybody's working under stressful scenarios, but it doesn't mean it needs to be a bad time. Yeah. And I think that's kind of how I've viewed it. Like, and I also like really want to be that guy, even heading into this latest movie with the producers, I want to be that guy where I'm like, no, don't worry about it. Like, we're going to get it done. Like we'll
positivity, good, strong leadership.
And I want to be the guy that delivers on that, promise, because I think that means a lot. And that's what's going to continue to get you the work. Yeah. As opposed to.
No, the money people have to trust that you have their interest at heart as well as your own artistic interest.
100%. Yeah, exactly.
So lastly, I just wanted to touch on Substack. Substack has become such an amazing place. This is how we connected, through Substack. I loved reading your posts on your Substack page, and the FilmStack community, Ted Hope, and all these amazing people that have kind of been contributing over this last couple years, building up what they're calling the NonDē, non-dependent film ecosystem, I think is wonderful. I've gotten so much out of my writing on Substack and connecting to new people on Substack. What do you feel like how is the process of writing about your work or your process or about filmmaking helped you as a director or as a writer, do you think, or as a person?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I just sort of enjoy it as an outlet. Like I started a couple years ago. I created a course called it was at the time called 6K Filmmaker, and I kind of tweaked it to be micro budget filmmaker because I just thought like,
Inflation.
listen, yeah, right, exactly. Um, but people would think it had to do with resolution, which it doesn't. So whatever. Anyway, course is called 6K Filmmaker because I made Layover for 6K, and sort of the idea was, oh, how do you do that? Because I think that a lot of people go out and make micro budget features, but they don't. They think they've got to restrict it to a certain amount of locations or a certain number of actors, or they can't work with SAG actors. There's just a lot of like, you don't get taught how to make those movies. I had to figure it out. A lot of other people I know had to figure it out. You kind of have to like, pull together a bunch of different like resources and experiences to know how to really do that. And if you can do it. But because I did it and I also had quote unquote success with it, meaning I got other work off of it. I owe my career to doing Layover. Um, I just thought there was some insight there worth sharing, because I would just get the same questions over and over again. How'd you do the airplane? How'd you do the airport? How'd you do the club? How'd you do all this stuff? And, it's not as simple as saying, well, we just went and got a club. A part of it was, well, how did we write that scene? Like, what was it that we needed to shoot at the club? And sort of just going all the way back to a mindset start, and I've just always been interested in mindset, especially when it comes to filmmaking, and also just these little tips and tricks on how to pull this kind of stuff off that I continue to use in movies with much, much higher budgets. At the end of the day, I sort of just got to a place where I enjoyed sort of just having like a little bit of outlet for sharing stuff that's on my mind about the industry, about, low budget filmmaking, micro budget filmmaking, directing as a whole. And I feel like because of where I've gotten to in my career, maybe those insights are worth something to somebody, maybe not. Um, but yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, the whole non-D thing is interesting, partly because I think a lot of us, it's a name to something a lot of us have sort of played in already. Um, but it'll be curious to see where if it works. You know, it's sort of an unknown thing right now. I mean, I certainly, and I've said this before, like I always wanted to be a studio filmmaker. Never really wanted to be an indie filmmaker or like a guy scraping artistic guy. Like I was always like, I want to have big budgets and I want to make big budget movies, and was very shameless about that, and that's still true today. Like I don't really want to go make $50,000 features, I will like if I have an artistic desire to make a movie like that, and there are a couple projects where I'm like, yeah, I'd love to just go shoot with a couple of actors in my camera, and just do it all like very 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 low budget. Part of it is finding a story that's worthy of that can also be accomplished at that budget level. Um, but I enjoy making movies with crews. I enjoy having name actors. I enjoy like money to do something with it, So it's weird. I'm kind of in both worlds. I've been through that path and I've participated in that kind of world. But I've also been doing other things, with that as well. And so my focus, because for me, it's a career, and for lack of a better term, it's a job, and I need the jobs. Like I don't need to make art. I need to have a living. And so I'm focused on stuff that's going to help me make a living. And then hopefully I get to a place where I could go do something like that. So, um, you know, to me, that's still being reliant on the distribution system as it exists, but also being okay with the distribution system as it exists. I've heard people echo this. Like, I have no interest in spending 3 years going across the country with a film and showing it to select single booking audiences. I just don't. Um, and I think that, I've yet to have a film of mine that feels worthy of that. It's weird because in this sort of sub five, not really like indie spirit award type of attention, Sundance type of attention, but not studio, this kind of like studio indie version. I don't even know how to describe it. For lack of a better term, I just call it the under five because of all these movies, and no offense to the movies you made, but I think we're all in this world where we're getting money to make movies. The movies aren't going to Sundance. They're not translating into like huge box offices things. They're sort of like working projects that we're just continuing to make and refine our craft and gain the experience of doing it. Um, it's I forget where I was going with that, but it's just like in that world, you're trying to seek out the opportunity you can get, and it's become sort of a semi working class approach, But those movies are not movies where I'm going to go spend forever trying to market them, and get them made. Oh, this is where I was going. Making those movies to me is the job. It's not a passion. I get very passionate about the movies I make, but I want to make commercial films that are going to try and have a chance of making money. And but also to me, the job is making the film. The distribution of the film is somebody else's job.
Right.
And I'm fine with that.
Mhm.
And I expect that a lot of that may not work and it may not net me a ton of things, but I've managed to make, the movie I just did is my sixth feature in a dozen years, and I see an opportunity to make several more down, in the near future, and that's really what I want to do. I enjoy the process of being on set. I like the job of making a film. I don't need it to be every film to be some passion thing that, like you said at the beginning, I've spent 15 years trying to make. I have those, but I'm not really interested in spending 15 years trying to get that made. I'll just wait 15 years until I'm at the point where I can go, yeah, that's the one I want to make now. There's a difference,
Yeah, there you go.
and so, I'm curious to see what really comes out of it, because I think like it's very easy to talk about making a movie. It's much harder to actually get it done and get it out there and have it be a success. And so I've had to switch my sort of mindset away from the external success of a movie's, box office return or reviews or whatever. Like that to me is sort of almost now irrelevant in my filmmaking process, because it just hasn't really had an impact. I'm not saying it can't at some point, and someday if I make a movie that gets a ton of box office, yeah, I'm going to reap the rewards of that and we'll take advantage of it. But the lack of it is also not something that has really had an impact on me. I still have gotten to make movies. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, it's 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 a very sort of stoic approach. I'm very into stoicism. I write a lot about stoicism, especially in filmmaking. It can be a very helpful philosophy for getting through stuff. But, to put your worth into the external success of a film, like box office or reviews or people's reactions or whatever, is to always lack the control of your emotional state. And I've been there. Movie comes out, you see a bad review, you don't get this now, all of a sudden it's affecting everything else, right? I've really tried to reframe everything I do now through the success is making the film. That's what I'm focused on. Everything else is, if it turns into anything, it's extra, but it's not, I'm not relying on it. And I think one of the challenges of NonDē is you have to rely on it. You've got to rely on your ability to get distribution, to market it, to go through all that process. Like, I'm not a marketer. I can tell you what works in a trailer or doesn't work in a trailer, or what I like about a one sheet or not, but I don't want to spend time developing that. I want the guy who's going to sell it to know what he needs on the poster to best sell the film. That's his expertise. It's not my expertise. My expertise is making the film. And that's really where I want to put my focus. So I feel like I can be maybe some help to some non-D filmmakers who are going through the process of making their film, probably doing it for very low budgets, and can speak to the, process of directing a film like that, of getting it made, of getting it finished. But it's tough because feels like a very wild, wild west type of world. And,
Yeah,
I
all
look on
the
it.
gates have opened, right? Like, and you don't
Right.
want to feel like you're just on a hamster wheel, continuously doing the same thing, making the same kind of movie you were 5, 10, 15 years ago, right?
Maybe I don't mind it. Really, like at the end of the day, like I mean, I don't think I will, right? But if I think at the end of the day, like I just love I love the process of making a film. I love the way it makes me feel when I'm doing it, and I feel a sort of wholeness and a value in the aspect of doing it because I think that that's what I'm supposed to be doing. That's my contribution in this world is making movies.
Yeah,
I thought
I
for
totally relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very empty when I'm not making a movie, right? And the time between Mending the Line, which I shot in 2021, and this new movie now, I mean, that's 4.5, 5 years. And that was a very difficult 4.5, 5 years, which has been difficult for a lot of people because of the strikes, because of the after effects of COVID, because of sort of the sort of resulting slowdown of work, which sort of conspired to make that a very, very difficult time. Um, but I've realized as a filmmaker right now, I am not really in a position to be that picky about what I do.
Right, right.
I thought maybe I would be. I thought that I could curate my filmography a little easier and really choose the movies I want to make. And I've kind of realized that's not really my career right now. Maybe someday I get to that point. But right now it's like what am I getting offered? Or what are the opportunities that I have? And saying, let's go make those. Like I'm fine with that, And so
Yeah, you have
if
to
it's
keep open-minded and be ready to go.
yeah, like so if it's doing a similar movie for a couple let's doing stuff lower budget, like let's go do it. I'd rather that than not, because the thing about this industry is you never know what one is going to hit.
Yeah,
You never know who you're going to meet. You don't know which actor is suddenly going to get on that film, and then you say, hey, like I really like this, I've got this other thing, would you like to come and do it? So you never know the opportunity that may come out of doing something, even if it's not really the film you want to be making right now. But a film made is better than a film that you didn't really want to make that's made is much better than a film that you really want to make that never gets made. Like, you got to earn it. And I can tell you, like being a first time director, it's a hurdle, you know, and you can be picky all you want, but you got to get a film made.
absolutely. Got to make the
So
film. Stay on set as much as possible. No,
yeah, like I mean, I
possible.
think about as a director, I was saying this to somebody, I in the last 12 years since I've been, directing full time, like I've not had other full-time jobs or anything like that. I have spent 130 to 140 days on set.
Right.
I'm not making these movies where I'm getting 100 days. These are 20-day shoots, 15-day shoots, whatever. It's like the longest shoot I ever did was negative, which we did for 37 days on $100,000 budget. But that's because it was me and four people. It wasn't a huge
You
crew.
stretch
So,
it out. Yeah.
yeah, we stretched it out. But I think that's the more you're on set, the more you're making movies. Like that's what's getting the more your name's in deadline as somebody who's making movies, and the more you're working with other actors who are going to spread the word about you, or like want to make another movie with you. Like, my dream has always been, how do I be able to pick up a phone and say, hey, you want to go make this? And then they say yes. And then you can go, hey, this person's going to make it. You want to finance it? And they say yes. I'm getting to that place at a certain budget level. And that's
Right.
exciting because, as long as we all understand the movie we're making, if you're making it a low budget,
Yeah. Yeah.
then like, great. But if you're expecting it to be Fast and the Furious and it's, not, um, I can't deliver that at such a low budget. So, I think it's great. I think like people have grappled onto it, but I also like I know others feel the same way, which is like, what's coming out of it other than great talk and theories, and we want to make a change and we want to do all this, but like at some point we got to start making movies in this model and actually seeing if it works. Because the problem is that movies are unique subjective experiences, right? What may work for one type of non-D movie is not guaranteed to work for another non-D movie. No
Yeah,
matter
highly personalized for
even
sure.
if you have the same data set, even if you have the same data and the same process and all this stuff, like the fact is, like, even two films from the same filmmaker are no guarantee of matching success. And that's the challenge. Now I understand like the system feels broken, and for a lot of people it's very hard to break in, and it's very hard to find the financing and have the success and distribution. At the same time, like, it's there are pathways, and non-D sort of needs to prove itself a little bit, you know.
Absolutely. And it's for me, I've seen it, the value of building the audience. When I made my first feature, we shot in 21, I edited in 22. We started doing festivals 23, 24, and then we released it on whatever you call it, an aggregator. And it doesn't really matter in some sense. Like we did really well with it as far as we could, but I saw like that's what really finally got me writing on Substack and trying to think about like how can I be kind of giving myself a little bit of a strip, a takeoff strip for your flight of your whatever the next film is.
Yeah.
And I think I've made so many good connections so far. That's what, I've really been finding a lot of doors were closed to me. Like, that if I wasn't someone I was working with on set, trying to get meetings with people. But when you kind of open up your mind to them a little bit or your process and write about it, I've been finding, more and more the longer I've been doing this, the more people come out of the woodwork or start subscribing or following or, commenting. And so in my case, I feel like I'm sort of moving towards a place where I felt for a long time I wasn't in any kind of film community, because the indie film community I came up with in the New York area kind of dissipated, or people either went into the union or whatnot. I eventually joined 600 to be in the camera union, and that, worked out very differently than I'd imagined it would.
Right.
And so I feel like, you've got to find that difference between friends, collaborators, and colleagues, right? And know who's who, kind of try to get a sense of, what kind of person you need to be working with or targeting, depending on what kind of film or project you're trying to make. So
Right.
I think there's a lot of value in the community building that's happening, and the sort of mutual, pulling up with the bootstraps, at many different levels. Obviously, we have old hand producers on there. We have young people right out of film school. I've been encouraging my students at Rutgers and SUNY and Rider to be getting on there and trying to kind of dip a toe in the business, see who's
Yeah.
working, who's writing about what, right? Like when I was in school, I'd assume when you were in school, there weren't a lot of outlets,
No.
other than the trades to kind of find out what was happening in the film business, right?
And it didn't allow for a sort of one-on-one connection.
Yeah.
That's I think what I've tried to offer on Substack is to say, look, like, I've been at this for 20 plus years. I've been a full-time director for 12. I've directed 6 features. Like, I have an idea of what I'm talking about, and I'm happy to share that with people that are interested in it. I mean, I built a course on it. It's like, to me, take advantage of that, and gain that knowledge, and so I think, like, I mean, I love the enthusiasm. I love the desire to change something and to fight back. I think that, I do feel like, I think somebody said this, I forget who it was, but it sort of feels like, what they say. They said, don't let building an audience become the new, I need to find money or something like that. It was this idea that, oh, I've got to, like, it doesn't, it's not, sometimes that's putting the cart before the horse. Like,
Sure. But at the same time, it's very hard to keep going when you feel like nobody cares or you're just by yourself in your room. And that's always been an artistic process, right?
yeah,
As a painter, a writer of a novel, whatever it is, you have to be alone and figure out what you're doing. So
right.
you're never going to lose that part of it. That's always the pain. And getting past that pain point is what determines often a successful artist versus a dabbler, someone that's just wants to tell people at the bar they're a filmmaker, you
Yeah.
know. So yeah, but I think, I've been, just when I look at the different kinds of communities online, just take Twitter, Instagram, a couple of
Film
the,
Twitter was terrible.
it's just
There's
the
no
worst.
community in Instagram for sure. No, I mean, I think like Substack is Substack in general, I love. I mean, in terms of the quality of the writing on there,
Yeah,
the sort of accounts that I found unrelated to film that
yeah,
I enjoy.
yeah. Oh,
And I
there's
think that like,
such a diverse interest
yeah,
and everything on there. I read a lot of political people,
right.
a lot of like writer. I love to read writers on there because
Yeah.
that's my weak point, is
Yeah.
like
Like
finding
I love a good
my voice.
essay. Like
Yeah,
give me a good essay,
yeah, yeah,
and so I think like but I do think I kind of with what you're saying, I do find that the sort of film stack community is probably one of the most supportive, um, enthusiastic, and sort of solid communities out there. I mean, I look at like the response to like Courtney Romano's like NonDē 50 and like how enthusiastic that is, and also with Ted's sort of like daily inspiration, which I did one. Did you end up doing one?
Not yet. Hey,
Well,
Ted.
they need
Oh,
it. You should do
yeah.
it.
Oh, no, no. Oh,
Um,
sorry. The Daily Inspiration. I've done that twice now, actually.
okay, there you go. All
Yeah,
right, well,
yeah.
you got
In
more than
fact,
me,
I wrote a
but
Stoic one about
oh,
Stoic
there you go.
philosophy and camera
Oh,
work.
you know what? I may have read that one.
Yeah, it was in early January. But
Okay. Oh no, maybe not. I was on a film, so I
I'll
wasn't paying
send it to you.
attention.
You can
Yeah, send it to
check
me.
it
I'll
out.
check it out. And
Yeah,
and I love that. I love the writing of it. So
yeah, yeah,
anything I say, it's not a knock on it. I think it's really
yeah,
just going. You know, I'm curious to see if it works and if what comes out of it,
yeah.
and the movies that get made. And I think like what I'm saying is at some point you got to make the food movie. Like I
Yes,
appreciate
absolutely.
the desire to build audiences and track data and all that kind of stuff, but like I said, the movie itself is such a subjective experience
Yeah,
that even with all that audience share, because look, there are people who are fans of Bella Thorne who maybe didn't like Infamous. It's like it's tough to. It's just not an objective thing,
no,
and
never
so
is.
I think that at some point, like part of it is make stuff. Like listen, I can write all day about making stuff, but you got to make stuff. Like make shorts, go shoot something, shoot a doc. I got to the point where, with features sort of in such a slowdown, I started turning towards doing doc stuff, of just having a camera and getting out there and shooting people and loved it, right? Because it's such a different way of filmmaking, but it also informs my own stuff later. I mean, like I said, this last movie, Infamous, and this last movie in particular, I was the camera operator. Like I love operating, and part of getting better as a camera operator is to be going out and shooting as a camera operator. And for me, docs are a way to do that.
Yeah,
You
because you
know,
don't
you,
have it all pre-planned out. You have to
right?
figure it out. Like this is my doc here. This is DINERMAN. I'm
Oh
doing
yeah,
this
yeah. I remember reading
doing
about
this
that.
one for the non-D 50 myself, and this I've been working on for several years. But again, it's always been back burner because shoot a couple days a month with the guy,
Right.
and it doesn't pay. I'm just doing it on my own. So
Yeah.
I've got to teach. I've got to do my shoots as they come up. And so I just thought when this 50 thing came up from Courtney Romano, I was just like, oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Because like
It's a good impetus for getting it done.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
when I did my feature, other people had put in money, like I felt a responsibility to my investors and
Right.
I made that edit within a year. Like we did
Yeah.
actually two versions of the movie because I edited it first and then I realized I'd messed it up or
Right.
it needed to be better.
Yeah.
And so we went and reshot a new opening and then, recut the whole movie essentially.
Yeah.
And that was a very great process to go through. And at the same time, I've never edited anything that long so fast. It's
Right.
almost an hour and a half, and just having that. So nobody's paying for DINERMAN except
Right.
my
Right.
time.
Yeah.
And
And it's like the other thing too is like if you're a filmmaker, it can be challenging to build an audience without films, you know?
absolutely,
Um, and a lot of people, they,
that's why there's so many camera reviews out there, right?
right.
Oh,
They,
like just got the Canon, whatever.
but I think that people use, again, I sort of echo it, which is I don't think you want, oh, I need to build an audience. to become, oh, I need to find the perfect script.
Yeah.
I need to write a script to make a movie. I mean, a great, I'll pass this along to you, just because you're an instructor. Like, one of the great pieces of advice I ever heard for young directors. One of the problems as a young director, just starting out, is, what are you making? What are you shooting? And the challenge can be, well, I don't know any writers. Well, now I need to write something. Maybe you're not a great writer, right? They're kind of two completely different disciplines. But now you got to write your own stuff. And that stuff's not going to be great. Like, it's just not, maybe you're brilliant and it comes out of nowhere, but most likely it's not going to be great. And that then impacts and informs the movie you're making, like the short you're trying to direct. And it's not helping you. Like a poorly written script or a mediocre script is not going to help you be a better director, right?
Nope.
Now, we all have bad films in them, and I get it. But one of the best pieces of advice I ever saw, which I've written about and I've conveyed, is if you want to direct and not be a writer director, but you want to direct, go find a short play. I think the Edward Albee's The Zoo was always sort of the example that I gave and heard about when I first heard about this. And go get that, adapt it into a script, and then go shoot it. And shoot it on an iPhone. Like, who cares? Like, you have the mics in the shot. It does not matter, because the beauty of that is twofold. One, you are now working with very well written material that's going to have a lot of subtext and depth into it because it's written by very good playwrights or whatever. You're not the one that has to put that in there. You can discover it and you can direct against it. But the other thing is, because you don't have the permission or the rights to it, you're not worried about what's going to happen with the film. So you can mess up. You can try something that doesn't end up working. You can shoot it with the mics, and who cares? But go make it and finish it and edit it together. And then throw it up on YouTube if you want. I don't really care. Like, give it away for free, but or never show it to anybody. But that exercise of working with good material is going to make you be a better director, but it also forces you to get out and just start doing it, as opposed to saying, well, I need a good script first. And now you're delaying it. And so in that same respect with the audience thing, the audience building is if you're a filmmaker, start making stuff, put yourself, because as much as people want to follow you, they follow you as a writer on Substack. Ultimately, the audience you want to build is the audience of people that want to watch what you're making. And it's hard to do that when they don't know what you're making. There was a great young producer, filmmaker, director named Tony Valenzuela who started a YouTube channel called Black Box TV. And we worked with him when I worked with the creator of CSI and partnered with him to produce content for YouTube. And he just started making shorts. Like, his whole thing was horror thriller. I'm going to make horror thrillers, and I'm going to make them under the banner of Black Box TV, but I'm just start making these little 4 or 5 minute shorts. And he shoots them in a day, and he would edit them, and he'd put them out there. And he really that's how he built his audience. He didn't build his audience by saying, hey guys, I'm going to make a bunch of stuff down in the future. In the meantime, I'll write about it. And this, again, I don't want to come off like I'm knocking anybody doing that, but he went out and made the things that he was telling his audience he was going to make. And that's what built his audience. That's what attracted it to him. So then when he started making a feature, they went with him. Same with the guy, everybody's talking about this guy, I forget the name, who did the movie that just came out where he self-distributed it through AMC.
Oh yeah, Iron Lung. Right?
Iron Lung.
Yeah, he built up a YouTube audience and
right. Now,
got them to
the thing that
promote
people are missing from that is he spent 15 years building up his audience.
It didn't just come out of nowhere. Absolutely.
It didn't just come out of a year of typing and showing behind the scenes stuff. He spent 15 years building up that audience and then went and made a feature. And that's what turned into that success. So again, you have to think, well, what is really contributing towards that audience building? And I personally think the best thing you can do is start out and just get out and start making stuff. Stop waiting for the perfect conditions especially if you're doing shorts, just bang that stuff out, do something.
Just make it, build trust. Trust is the most important commodity right now.
Right.
Budgets, if you build trust with the audience, you'll have them in your pocket.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end. I really appreciate, Joshua, all the insights you've given us today, and just, conversing with you has been an absolute pleasure. I'll put your Substack and links to your movies in the notes, or in the Substack below this. But thank you so much for joining and talking with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Happy to do it again when you get into more episodes.
Absolutely. Yeah, let me know when you got that new movie out, and we'll
I will for
talk
sure.
about it.